Policy and Government Relations Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first order of business would be an opportunity for public comment. Don't believe we have anyone this evening. So then, could we verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Excellent. Then, our first order of business will be our minutes. Our first action item would be our minute approval from the October 9th meeting of Policy and Government Relations. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
Second.
Seconded by, I'm sorry, Mr. Borowski?
Yes.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry.
Discussion.
I'm sorry.
Discussion, please.
Mr. Wad, go ahead.
Thank you. So in reviewing the minutes, I'm looking at item E2. Perhaps other people have a better memory than I. I don't recall us actually voting on the electoral process policy 0142.1. I didn't have time to get back and watch the meeting from last time, but I thought that we had tabled that. And I believe that policy is back before us tonight, is it not?
Yes, the policy is.
So I'm wondering if maybe we need to,
I
Yeah.
think what happened was we voted on it at committee, but we pulled it off the consent agenda at full board.
That is what I
Yeah, okay.
recall.
I think that's what happened.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other discussion on the minutes? All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes 5-0. All right. Let's move on to our discussion information, I'm sorry, our first action item. Get back to my agenda here. So the first action item today is the electoral process policy, which is 0142.1.
Right. So we've had, to Ms. Kelleher's point, we took it off at the full board. We had some good discussion. We have 3 actual options in the board docs, and then one in front of you as well, which is Mrs. Boyd's edits. So we had the original electoral process policy. We then had ones with revisions from last month's policy meeting that we put together. That was in board docs. And then just this afternoon, we put another one in board docs that came from Mrs. Voigt. But to be clear, we also put it on your table so that you could try to compare them. So this one is very similar to the one that has the revisions from the, I guess we should say, actual board meeting, right? Not the policy meeting.
I think the main changes here are the ones that David suggested at the board meeting last time. And that's the reason that moved from the consent agenda on to, to come back here to be reviewed again. The main changes, I can just walk through what they are.
Can I just ask a question before you do? So there were 3 on board docs like late this afternoon, like 4 or 5 o'clock. So this isn't a 4th one, this
No,
is just
no.
that third. Okay, I just want to make
This is
sure.
the
I've
third
got the
one.
3. Okay,
Yes.
Correct.
thank you, go ahead.
Yeah, the changes that David suggested would be, instead of saying declaration of candidacy, to say ballot access for candidates seeking election to the Board of Education. So that change is included. He had suggested actually including the Wisconsin Elections Commission website as a source to be able to get the information that you need to be able to declare candidacy. And also strongly suggested that we have the election law be included as a reference at the bottom. And rather than including it in the body of it, just referencing it at the bottom of the legal 8.10, et cetera, all the legal references that make up the pretty hefty set of legislation that guides this procedure. And that list I pulled right from the documents that Sue Enninger gives us. These are all the places that she's pulling from to be able to, to put the packet together. David, did I adequately
Yeah.
incorporate the changes you wanted to see?
I'm just, from a in order to make the motion, I'm just wondering how I do it, since we got three different versions here. Are they identified by any sort of version number or something, so I can specify which one I'm going to move be adopted?
The last one was called 12/11/23. That might be today's version, kind of thing.
Yeah, I did notice it actually said return to committee 10/11/23, but it's really 12/11/23.
12.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do have a question. So I guess on the back of the third one that was just added this afternoon, it says, if an incumbent, right at the top, it says if an incumbent fails to file a declaration of candidacy and nomination papers by 5 PM deadline on the first Tuesday in January, candidates may file a declaration of candidacy and nomination papers within 72 hours following the original Tuesday deadline. So basically, the deadline's Friday, not Tuesday?
Only if the person doesn't turn it in. So if they file it, I think I'm saying this correctly. I had this happen once in a different district.
Yeah, the way it read, I just thought, well, it just makes it sound like the deadline's Friday, but go ahead.
So we're adding, in this particular one, we'd add the green with the top part, correct?
That's my understanding in reading this.
Yes.
Well, it's actually, I think actually the green is saying exactly what you're saying, Mr. Borowski.
Well, I think,
Well, one's declaration of candidacy, sorry.
yeah, I was just going
One's
to point out, I
non-candidates.
believe the first paragraph talks about if an incumbent didn't file a declaration of candidacy.
Candidate versus non.
And then he didn't also file, or he or she didn't also file the proper paperwork to run, then there is a 3-day extension to allow others who may have assumed that the incumbent was running and then didn't file to be able to get their paperwork in. So there's a 3-day extension if there is a
That's
if the
correct.
incumbent does not file a non-candidacy, but then also doesn't file as a candidate to run with their proper paperwork. Otherwise, the second paragraph that then says otherwise, I believe if they either filed the non-candidacy or filed their paperwork by the Tuesday deadline, then there is no extension. Then Tuesday, the only time it would be 3 days later is if one or more incumbents didn't file a non-candidacy and then chose not to file to run.
Got you.
Does that,
Okay.
Perfect.
Because I wonder if we should say other candidates may file a declaration of candidacy. I don't know, maybe it's just me that read that wrong. It almost sounds like if I don't file by Tuesday, I can actually file in 3 more days, in 72 hours by Friday, but.
The way, Mayor,
Yeah.
the way I'm reading what you said, the way I'm interpreting it is the people who are not incumbents get the extension. So if the
Yes,
candidate- if the
that's
candidate-
correct.
yeah, if
Okay.
the candidate
I
does
suppose.
not- If the candidate does not file either one, to be fair to the people who are looking to run, it's giving them a 3-day extension because they didn't know, it wasn't aware of that, so it's kind of like, it wasn't their fault.
Yeah.
So, however, if the candidate do file, like Mr. Watson, my understanding is, then there's no grace period for them because they did know, in fact, that they.
Right. And actually, now that I read it, by using the term candidate, that's different, so.
Yeah.
So it's fine, I'm good.
this does raise an interesting question, though. Does that also provide a 3-day extension for the incumbent to then choose, well, now I'll just wait and file on Friday? Or once the incumbent doesn't file, is that specified anywhere? Do we need to call that out? Is that in state law anywhere? I'm not certain, to be honest.
I'm not certain if it's in law, but I do know if they don't, they don't get the 3 days. The other
It would only be
other
for
candidates.
non-incumbent candidates.
Correct.
Okay.
Do we want to consider possibly calling that out. I don't know if it's necessary that we do or not, but that would sort of close the loop on that extension applies only to non-incumbent candidates. Is there a place we might want to insert that language?
Sure, we can do that.
Well, and that's what I guess that's what was my initial confusion, but now that we talked it through, candidate is different from incumbent, so I don't know if we need to do
Well, but an
that.
incumbent is a candidate, can be a candidate as well. There is an incumbent, and then they become a candidate when they file their paperwork.
A candidate for reelection.
Yes, they're still an incumbent, but they're also a candidate. They're an incumbent candidate.
Well, then maybe if we feel we want to clarify that, after, where it says January, comma, should we say other non-incumbent candidates may file a declaration of candidacy and nomination papers within 72 hours?
Yeah, I think that removes any of the cloudiness around whether an incumbent gets that 3 days or not.
Okay, so other non-incumbent candidates,
That works.
so just adding the words other non-incumbent?
Do we need to say other non-incumbent, or do we just say non-incumbent candidates?
Yeah, I guess we could just say non-incumbent.
So I guess I'm wondering, do we need to officially do that as an amendment, or are we in a drafting phase right now, since there isn't actually a motion to adopt anything at this point?
I think we're still in a draft.
I think we're all drafting at the moment.
Okay.
And my concern there is that, you know, if we try to get too fine a detail, I don't want to lose what was in the original policy that, you know, we could do too much work to make it more unclear. So I just want all of us to be thoughtful of that. Before we, so we have the notation you made there, Mr. Browski. The paragraph below here in green is meant to replace the paragraph above. Is that correct on the second page?
No.
That's in addition? Okay.
Yes, one is talking about declaration of candidacy, one is talking about declaration of non-candidacy.
Okay.
I do want,
Mr. Moore?
thank you. I do want to go back to the question that Mr. Watt asked about the incumbent getting the 3-day extension. Is that something that we just decided as a school district? Because I know you all said there was no state law regarding that. Is that just something that each district on its own decides that, or?
No. I said I don't know if it's in, I assume it's in state law, but no, that's a universal
Okay, so you, okay. So I just want to make.
piece.
I do have a question in regards to the legal on the last page in red. Was this gone over by our legal, or did we look up statutes to just make sure that we were adding? I don't know if this came in the revisions.
No, these were added in by.
I added them
Yeah.
based on the paperwork I received last
Okay.
year from Sue.
All right. So what I'm hearing on the table at the moment is, other than the issue of the clarifying the language around incumbents filing, are there any other areas we'd like to focus on, or let's try to decide upon what we'd like to do with this here? Ms. Voigt?
Just to clarify, on the sheet that I received, as a candidate, I just pulled all the references that she had, and just put them at the bottom. So like, when she'd be talking about the campaign registration form, that was, like, I listed what those citations were from, the statutes. And the bulk of it is coming from 8.10, subsection 2,
Okay.
so.
Are there any other questions or thoughts on the language around non-incumbent candidates. What I had in that first paragraph was after January, non-incumbent candidates, comma, and that was the bulk of what I heard you say, Mr. Brodsky. Okay.
Right, it was just adding
One word
the one word before candidates.
for clarification. Good clarification.
All right. Are there any other areas of the policy we'd like to talk over? Okay. Well, I would be looking then for a motion to amend what we had gone over. I think we need to do that first, and then we can talk about whether or not we'll motion to pass. If anyone has any,
I would move to adopt the version that we were just discussing, presented by Mrs. Voigt for consideration tonight.
all right, no second? Second by Mrs. Voigt. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? So 5-0. So are there any other areas of discussion we would like to have around the amendment? Or anything else on the policy?
I think it was approved as amended.
No.
Yeah.
Right, because we amended it while drafting it and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
adopted the entire
And is there,
policy,
okay,
right?
I'm sorry. I was unclear that we were going
I think that's
to go over more. Okay.
Yeah, I thought we were just,
You all thought that, I was on a different page, but I am fine with that, let's move forward. All right, excellent. Let's go on to our next action item, which is policy 7250.01, memorials for staff and students, and this is a new policy.
Yes, Mr. Zenobia and committee, this is a new policy suggestion from Neola. And Neola makes recommendations based on statutory changes or changes that occur in the budget, federal or state. They also make recommendations based on work in the field and things that they think might be helpful. And so this is an optional policy for us that would guide memorials for staff and students and put some parameters around what would be the guidelines for those things. Those can be obviously very difficult times when students or staff pass away. And so this policy outlines the district's, what the district does allow. And it talks about examples of things like blood drives or partnering with local nonprofits or establishing scholarships as examples. Then further states that generally speaking, so we would not support permanent memorials on district ground for students and or staff, memorial plaques, things of that nature, unless approved by the board. And then lastly, there's a provision on suicide, and that suicides can be very difficult, obviously, too. And so it talks about what we would do in that kind of a case. Life-affirming projects would be encouraged, and examples include volunteering, tutoring, fundraising for a charity, or community service.
Mrs. Voigt.
As I was reading this, I couldn't help but think that we do have a policy for naming of school facilities, as we had done for the Les Paul cafeteria. And I think that that should almost be a cross-reference point here, that if there would be a situation where someone is passed that's been a superintendent for the last 30 years or something, we do want to do something about it. You know, at their passing, there is a procedure for naming of school facilities. It's policy 7250. And it's very, you know, this is not at a drop of a dime, you're going to change the name of, you know, a building or a field house or whatever it might be. But I think just to reference that here, that there is another policy that is somewhat related to this in terms of trying to recognize someone after they passed away.
Sure, I think that would be fine. You see with this one, there is no statutory reference, so you have
Right.
quite the amount of flexibility. So if you'd like that, we certainly could do that.
What do you suggest then?
Yeah, I definitely suggest that. You know, I had gone through the process of recommending that the cafeteria at Les Paul be renamed for Theodore Yeomans. And that was several months process. Literally, 5 months, 6 months, you know, before we got the full process, because you have to get a committee together that is made up of at least 7 citizens to review the situation. And the person that's being recognized has to be a prominent person who is contribute to Waukesha area history and or progress. And there's like 5 criteria, kinds of things that goes along with it. But definitely, and we've had places like the room over at Lindholm, one of the conference rooms right across from the board meeting room was renamed for a former administrator. You know, so it's something that has been done, can be done, and it's using policy 7250 for naming of school facilities.
So do you have a statement that you're recommending we add, or is there just a standard way to reference another?
Well, they say
Policy.
memorial, in the 3rd paragraph, they say memorials are permissible only after a proposal approved by the board, such as, as outlined in, you know, it would probably be the best way to do it, because in this, we're defining what that board approval would look like, especially for naming rights. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it would just be like, the statement that's there would just say, like, such as, or reference, you would even do it 7250 for naming school facilities.
Right, because my guess is there might be a memorial that's different than what's in that policy you're recommending. So maybe instead of such as, it would just be reference.
Reference.
I'm sorry, perhaps I'm missing something. Policy 7250 speaks specifically to,
Naming of school facilities.
okay,
So if you want to rename a field house or rename an auditorium, I'm thinking of all the things that I've seen happen in the district over my years here.
And I think you're responding more as a memorial, but, and that's fine. I have no issue with adding the reference. The way I see this policy is it's more of the present time, right? But I don't have any, I think pointing future committees back to another policy where we don't want to say, well, we wouldn't be able to rename a school or a cafeteria in honor of someone. You know, we don't want to discourage that, correct? We just want to make another reference. I see where you're coming with that. And we do reference other policies. You know, other than just putting the number down at the bottom. I don't know if we need to add to the language, but
It could just be a reference under the Neola 2023 also, you know.
It could be. You could just list policy 7250 as a reference point for
Reference.
people to.
Yeah, that's what I was
Back and forth.
thinking, because,
Rather than the body of it. Yeah, that's fine.
yeah, that's. Mr. Juan, did you have a question?
that's satisfying, okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this other than the reference point? Then I would be looking for a motion to approve as amended.
Also move.
Ms. Voigt,
Got it.
I saw her hand first, I'm sorry.
You beat me, though.
Seconded by Mr. Borowski.
Sure.
Seconded by Mr. Borowski. I was looking the wrong way. All right.
That better be right in the minutes next month, let me tell you.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Passes 5-0. All right. Our next action item is 8121, which is the personal background check of contracted services, which is also a new policy.
Yes, Mr. Zenobia and committee, this is a new policy as well. It is designed to protect the security of school facilities and the safety of students and staff with ever-increasing reliance on contract workers in construction work being done at school sites or other services being performed by individuals that may have access to students. So basically what it says, again, you have a great deal of flexibility here. in the third paragraph is that each individual serving as a contractor or subcontractor who is likely to have direct ongoing contact with children in the course of providing services to the district shall be required to report the conviction of the contractor or subcontractor for a crime and substantiated reports of child abuse or neglect of which the contractor or subcontractor is the subject. So you might be wondering, how do we do that now? Because we have people that we contract with. And so it is a part, like during the referendum, when all those people providing all those services, it's a part of the actual RFP where they have to make sure that they have background checks. They have to make sure that they are told that there's no smoking, that they follow all district policies. So we do it in those big examples. Adopting this policy would become part of everyday life with all policies, and it would make it explicit that we require it. We already have the contractors that we work with, they do background checks on their employees, and they are responsible with the people they send in. This would just probably allow us to work, if you approve this, we'd put this kind of language in everything that we sent out in terms of contractual language.
Any questions or comments?
Yes, I don't know if this is splitting hairs, but, so direct ongoing contact. I had a little trouble with the word ongoing, because what if they just have direct, like, one-time contact with students? Are we saying that they're not checked or have background, done on them? And if so, are we okay with that?
No, we wouldn't be, right? Yeah, so you wouldn't have to have direct or ongoing. I suppose if you didn't want, you could just say who is likely to have contact. And that would be fully acceptable. It's a good point, Mr. Borowski.
Yeah, I don't know what the committee's thoughts on that are, but I was thinking it's a bit of a loophole, or just,
Well, I would just say, just leave direct and take out
Ongoing.
Right?
I would be okay with that. I don't know what the rest of you think.
Mr. Moore?
I'm all for background checks, but I just have a question about I know companies have to pay for those background checks, so who's responsible for that? I wouldn't want the employees to be responsible for it, so I'm sure the company will have to, the district, since we're requiring it ongoing, we're gonna put that bill. I'm just
Not us.
Oh.
No, I mean, if they want to acquire our business, then that would be the expectation that they would submit that information to us. And how they would go about it would be up to them.
Also, they'll do it through their own. And then that employer, the company can decide how they go. Okay, so it's giving them the autonomy on how to, okay,
Yep, I think so.
fine with it then, yeah.
From that paragraph, I would assume that it's an ongoing process for them, that to be hired for this company, they have to go through a background check.
Correct.
So that it's like quite a condition of employment on the part of the company that we're contracting with.
And what this is basically saying is, so they're going to do all of that, and then they're working for us, and they get charged with something, or something happens potentially during the course of their work with us. They need to inform us of that. And I think that's actually a healthy thing.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as, the way I initially read it was, it's duration. I mean, some contracts we have that are going to be ongoing could be months, years, right? I mean, school projects, so I don't know if ongoing is saying direct and ongoing. I don't really read it that way, but, if we want to strike the word ongoing, I'm okay with that. It's just, I read it as, someone's going to come here as a contractor, work for a long period of time. We expect if they're already having that contact, that could continue. They're supposed to inform us of any changes outside of that initial understanding that they've had a check and they're not working, around our students. So, Mr. Watt.
But is that the case, Dr. Siebert, that this would be for ongoing contracts as opposed to maybe it's a one-day engagement that we have for some sort of work, and those contractors are going to be in direct contact with students? I would assume whether it's a one-day on-site work or it's ongoing work, like I'm thinking of the Verkada project, right?
Yes.
Where they might be at all the different schools at different points in time. That doesn't, I didn't read this policy to assume that it was only for ongoing. I assumed that you wanted any contractor who would have direct contact with students to have to have been background checked.
Yes, and I think that's the way that we ensure that we can be as safe as possible.
Okay.
And I agree with that. I was just trying to clarify
Yeah.
the latter part of that. I would read it the same way, that it covers all contractors and subcontractors, any duration. Yeah,
So you were
Both.
saying and was
yeah.
not, it had to be both direct and ongoing, but.
Well, I just read it as there's, some contractors are here, like you said, a
Yep.
day, and some may be here for a year, or longer. So that's how I read the word ongoing. In this language, that was just.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just my bias of how contractors work, and, you're gonna have some here for a day and some here for months, so.
Yeah, I thought the comma meant really and, like direct and ongoing, but, so, okay, so are we, sounds like we want to strike the word ongoing. If that's the case, I've seen it once in every paragraph, okay, unless it's more, but that's what I saw.
Do we have a motion to adopt on the floor, or are we drafting right now?
We're drafting.
Drafting a friendly amendment, I would
Okay.
propose that. So, just the word ongoing in all 4 paragraphs. I see it 4 times as well. Ms. Foley?
I say by getting rid of the ongoing is saying any direct contact. If they're there for one day, doing a project in the grounds, or something, putting in a new sidewalk or whatever, and they have like, contact with the kids, we want to make sure that anybody who's working for us does right by our kids,
Right. Yeah, that's what was bothering me about that.
right? Ongoing, because really with the comma, it would mean and ongoing. So
Right.
grammatically, I think this is a better read.
Good.
All right.
Other changes or, no?
No, I don't.
Well-
Are there any other changes at this time?
So I'll move to approve policy 8121 with the amendment.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Watt. All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Passes 5-0. All right, our next action item would be policy 9211, which is direct support organizations.
All right. So thank you, Mr. Zenobia. So this one, 9211, District Support Organizations, one that's already on the books since 2017. What this policy is doing is inserting a piece that says that organizations described in this policy must obtain advance written permission from the building principal or superintendent before using district logos. And so we have some of this in place already where they have to get, West is a good example. They have their paw, and you can only use it in certain ways. You can only put certain writing over it. You can only do it in certain ways. And so we're working on that across the high schools where this is primarily the piece. So we're getting there with that. And they would just say that people have to get permission first. And then the second piece just really puts a little more clarity around the sale of food items. And there's a lot of, we had Aramark here earlier with F&F. There's a lot of federal law that talks about how you can't compete with the food service program of a school district. And so it makes it clear that they can have fundraisers, but they have to be 30 minutes following the close of the last lunch period until 30 minutes after the end of the school day. So there's like a parameter of time when they can have those types of fundraisers, and we follow that already. It's just more putting practice into words.
Any,
Yes, Mr. Moore, something like that.
any other questions or comments?
I would move to adopt policy 9211 as presented.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moore.
Discussion.
Yeah, discussion. Go ahead, Ms. White.
I'm wondering, on this one, just like the other one, should there be a reference at the bottom to some of those other, we've talked about these other concepts in other policies, to reference where we talk about the logoing, because that came up not that long ago. And when we talked about the food service kinds of things, I had the athletic director in and describing when it worked. Like, I think to reference that this is something that, there are other policies that are impacted, and if somebody's really looking at this, they could go to policy, I don't know what those numbers are, I didn't look them up this time.
Sure.
But just to have that as a reference point, again, at the bottom, that these are other related, like you said, we have other related policies to this particular issue.
I don't know if we have a related practice, I should say, Mrs. Boyd.
Oh.
I don't know that we have other policies that necessarily get at this. It was somewhat a suggestion that was putting practice into policy.
Mr. Moore.
So the club wanted to do like a fundraiser, or like a Spanish or French class wanted to go to France, they went to fundraise for, the choir went to fundraise for New York. It was, the superintendent say, the teacher wouldn't say, the doctor said, we're looking at fundraising for New York, is this okay, we can have this day set for schools or something?
They'd work with the principal in that case, Mr. Moore. So like at the school, it goes through the principal for permission of those logos. If they wanted to use like the district logo, somebody did, they'd come to me. Yes.
We have a pretty good feel that all of these organizations that are currently using the logo are in compliance with our policies, generally speaking. I mean, what maybe is a little bit of the process for that to get approved, from how you see it, and how long it takes some of these groups to gain approval? And
From my understanding, the athletic directors are the key in this. And so the athletic directors, through the booster clubs, and then also through their coaches and connecting with the feeder programs, that's the way that these pieces get put together. And so it's pretty clear what groups fit in these, the junior black shirts or the football teams that you coach, Mr. Watt, or things like that. I mean, it's very clear. And then for the most part, I don't see it being a really big challenge. I think it's more putting some clarity around it and asking me to put together some administrative guidelines that we certainly could do that would provide more clarity at the school level as well.
And most of these are athletic groups.
I would say, generally speaking, yes. I mean, there'll be some club-type activities that might want to use a logo for something, but it's primarily athletic-related.
This does reference parent-teacher organizations, and it sounds like that's also, just given that we're going to look next at rescinding one directly related to parent organizations.
Yes.
So I think PTOs are probably about too, Mr. Zenobia.
And part of that is thank you, Mr. Wad, 9210, some of that language about PTOs is in 9210, and it's moving it over here into 9211, and then that's a new Neola thing, I'd say, Julie, wouldn't you? We never used to do that, but what they're trying to do now is try to combine some policies that might be somewhat redundant, or put, like Mrs. Voigt has been trying to do, put things together that seem to make sense in one policy as opposed to being in multiple. So that's an example here. That's the next agenda item, is rescinding the former 9210, which would then be contained within 9211 that you're talking about now.
Okay. All right. I believe that we had this motion already, so all those in favor of approving this policy, say aye.
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 All those opposed? So that passes 5-0. And so that our next policy is the one that was referenced, 9210, parental organizations or parent organizations, a policy that would be rescinded. Potentially, Dr. Seaborn.
Yeah, that one is the one that would be rescinded because the 9211 that you just approved now contains language from that policy as well as some additional language to strengthen it.
All right, any further questions or comments? If not, I'd be looking for a motion to,
I so move to rescind policy 9210.
Second.
second by Mr. Moore. Any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Policy passes 5-0. All right, that is our action items. Let's move on to our discussion and information items. The first of which would be the legislative updates that have been put together for us.
Yeah, all right, well, thanks, Mr. Zenobia. I'll walk the board quickly, or the committee quickly through these. First one, we have 5 of them. First one is AB 640, SB, AB meaning Assembly Bill, SB meaning Senate Bill 608, from Representative Dietrich, Senator Knodel. This one has some ties to the local area. This is the one that Mrs. Voigt has talked about a few times, where the Brown Deer Superintendent has worked with Senator Knodel specifically to put a bill together that would create a pathway for paraprofessionals or educational assistants with district approval to become teachers in that particular district. And so it's designed to really help with the teacher shortages that many of us, almost all of us, are facing. And those, you've all been in the schools, and sometimes when you're in a classroom, it's very hard to tell who the teacher is and who the educational assistant is. And our educational assistants are very strong. And so we do try to grow them into teachers when they want to be teachers. And this bill would allow ultimately the district to approve them, and the DPI would grant them a provisional license to teach in a particular content area or grade level. So I find it to be interesting, and I think it'll be interesting to see ultimately where it goes. Mrs. Voigt, anything you wanted to add? You've had some insight into this bill for a while.
I know that the folks at SWSA have been very proud of working with Senator Knodel and being able to try to put this together. So they've gone to the hearings and are, trying, obviously the Brown Deer Superintendent and the people that originally have experiences with trying to start this out, has spoken very, very positively about it.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
It's interesting because the Brown Deer Superintendent was my principal when I went to elementary school.
Oh, she was?
Yes, Ms. Brown. But I will say that I am actually pleased to see that this come through. I know, Dr. Seaver, we talked about this over the months about the shortage of teachers and how to wheel teachers into the profession from different backgrounds, and one including educational assistants. I know Mrs. Voigt and I have had the pleasure of working with educational assistants in our careers, and to see that this be an opportunity for them to grow their career is amazing, due to the shortage that we already have. And I think this is going to bring an answer and a solution. I also like the fact that it's focused solely on the district currently that they're working in. I think that that's more pleasable to. It's a win for that district and a win for that educational assistant, so that once they do grow into that role, get the license, we know that we have captivated a strong, solid pool of licensed teachers that we don't have to worry about a shortage in the district. And they have really been able to grow their career and move up in the ranks in terms of their profession. So I think it's a win-win for both the district and the individuals itself. So I'm really pleased to see this, and I hope to hear some good news in the future. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moore. We'll see where it goes. The next one is AB 308, SB 305 from our very own Representative Allen and Senator Jacques. And I'm going to probably let Mr. Zenobia speak to this one because both he and Dr. Piasek testified at the hearing for this bill last week. It's a proposal to eliminate protection from prosecution of employees of libraries and educational institutions when, and I guess the term would be profane or significantly challenging material is in libraries or continues to be brought in to libraries. But Mr. Zenobia, please feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I had the honor of being asked, along with Dr. Piasek, to come and testify on this bill. And we did that on, was it Monday? It's been a long week. Tuesday. So we got a chance to go, and it was my first time in the Capitol testifying on anything, so it was, again, an honor to be there. All these bills were talked about the day we were there, and the first bill you mentioned got a lot of time. I think it was probably 3 or 4 hours that they talked about that before they got to this bill, and they had others on the docket. But there was a lot of testimony around it. We've had discussions with Rep. Allen, even going back a year and a half, about potential legislation to start to tackle areas of this issue that have been talked about not only here in Waukesha, but all over the country. So I think this is part of a great first step to start to change the culture around how education makes available these materials. And it really is just taking education and educators out of that preferred, or what I call a carve-out of immunity, if you will, for having these libraries these materials, which it says obscene materials in our libraries. I think the big difference is the original legislation that excluded all of those named in education was passed back in 1977. So it's something that was even discussed at the hearing, and has been long, I think, outdated, and to begin to look at potentially changing some of these laws to further protect our children, especially those that are in elementary school. It would go a long way to addressing the issues that are all over the country. So, it was a great experience, and I was glad to do it, and it's always learned a lot. So,
Sure.
Mr. Watt.
Yeah, so first of all, Mr. Zenobia, I want to thank you and Dr. Piasek for testifying. I watched it. I thought you both did a wonderful job, not just of talking about the importance of reestablishing some accountability in our public schools for the material that enters, but also telling the story of how we've addressed that issue here in the school district of Waukesha, and I think we have a good story to tell. I don't think the work is done yet, but I really am proud of the way this district responsibly tackled the issue of obscene materials that were that had no business being in any of our libraries or were misplaced, and quickly addressing those issues and trying to identify them and get those materials where they need to be and put a parental notification process in place. So I appreciated both you and Dr. Piasek telling that story as well, because I think a lot of districts could potentially benefit from our experiences. So I just wanted to thank you for doing that, and hopefully encourage some people who may not have seen it to go back and try to find it, because I thought it was among the best testimony of the day.
Thank you for that. Dr. Piasek and myself, during our testimony, took some time to talk about not only our experience here, but some of the work that's been done. And it has been a tremendous amount of work, and I think I've said it over the course of the last 2 years is, as we went through this process, my gratitude for that effort put in to start to address the issue just here in Waukesha has been fantastic. And I mean, it's everybody that's worked on this and that's listened to the board and had a hand in it is really deserves the thanks and gratitude of our community. And we've got a ways to go, and look forward to continuing that. So,
Sure.
I don't know if anyone else had a comment, question.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you.
The third one we have today is AB 341, SB 333, Rep. Spiro, Senator James. This is legislation that is trying to close a loophole between sexual abuse and sexual harassment in state statutes. It has bipartisan support. It seems very likely that this bill is going to move forward, and we'll continue to watch that as well. Not necessarily an educational bill, if you will, but those situations find themselves into schools on a more regular basis than any of us would like to see. So it is something we should continue to pay attention to. The fourth one is AB 644, SB 605, Rep. Pennerman, Senator Knodel. And under this bill, school districts would have the option to exceed the number of seats previously allocated for open enrollment for a non-resident student who is the child of a district teacher. So in our example, a teacher lives in Oconomowoc, teaches in the school district of Waukesha, as an example. I'm just picking cities. And then we had said that we didn't have any seats available in a particular grade level, but as a retention perspective, we would be able to say if this bill passed that your child could come with you to the school district of Waukesha. Some people will like that concept, some people won't, right? Like, is that fair, is that unfair? But I think it's seen as a way to reward teachers that serve in a district by allowing them to bring their own kids to that district. And quite honestly, that says a lot when a staff member wants to bring their kids to the district, because it means that staff member thinks highly of it. But we'll see where that goes. But any feedback, Mr. Moore?
I personally think it's fair. I mean, you look at our society today, in any workforce, employees have more benefits for their kids than people who parents don't work there, if that makes sense. Professors, their kids get to go to college for free. In that same concept, does that make sense? So I think that's a good thing to retain teachers, but also, quite harshly, I mean, we live in a society where, unfortunately, employees who work at different companies get better benefits than people who don't work there. It's nothing new. It's not out of the ordinary. So,
Good points. Good points.
Comments?
All right. Then the last one is Senator Jagler. And under this proposal, if a school district chooses to administer the state assessment, the forward exam in this instance, I would think this would apply to the ACT as well, remotely, they must adhere to the requirements of the bill, which means they have to have remote proctoring, and it seems to me like this bill would be encouraging the DPI to work with the vendors to provide that type of remote proctoring. We have an example of this in the school district of Waukesha. The kids that take eAchieve, or in the eAchieve program, they take the forward exam, they take the ACT, and we actually, we had always done some kids at Lindholm, we'll do now some kids at Blair, where if they live in a proximity, they can come here and we monitor and proctor them taking either of those exams. But then also with eAchieve, we go out to, I believe it's about 10 to 12 sites across the state, primarily public libraries. In the past, they used to use hotels. Hotels have gotten more expensive to use, like their bigger spaces. So we send our staff to those locations, Eau Claire, Fond du Lac, Green Bay, Toma, Madison, kind of spread out all around the state, where we have opportunities for kids that attend eAchieve but live in different parts of the state to come to those areas and take those assessments with our district eAchieve staff monitoring them. So we're already ahead of the game with that, and I just thought it was a nice idea to be able to share with you that. I don't know that a lot of people know that we go out. It's kind of neat when the kids come down here. You know, we see them taking their tests a couple times a year, but then to know that we also are going out to all these different areas of the state to meet parents where they are and make sure that those kids are able to be tested when they're already observed. So it's interesting. Mr. Watt.
Is there a problem that this bill is attempting to solve? Are there exams not being properly proctored in the virtual?
I've been trying to dive into that too. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering too. Like, I mean, we have a system for it, and I would think other districts would too. I just don't know how prevalent it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Our next discussion information item this evening is our proposed WASB resolutions for 2024.
All right. So I'll get us started on these. The WASB resolutions come forward each year. School district member boards can submit them, put them out. There's ultimately a WASB Policy and Resolutions Committee that selects the resolutions that'll move forward to the Delegate Assembly, which takes place in Milwaukee during the State Education Convention. Mr. Zenobia is our chair for that, and this year there are 11 that have been selected by the Policy and Resolutions Committee. So as the chair, Mr. Zenobia goes to the Delegate Assembly, and then he represents the board and the district in voting on these particular resolutions. And then ultimately, the resolutions that are approved at the Delegate Assembly become the lobbying platform for the WASB, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, moving forward. They become the agenda. I think what sometimes is misunderstood is sometimes I think some people think if these get approved, then they become a law or a rule, and that's not the case. They don't. That still all has to go through the legislative process, like we just talked about, but they do become the platform for lobbying. So with 11, that is a lot. You've had the chance to look through those. What I thought is if there are ones that you have particular questions on, we could certainly answer the questions. However, if you wanted to go through them one by one, we could do that as well. I'd leave that up to the discretion of the group.
Mr. Moore, you had a question when,
Did we go over Assembly Bill 341 or
I believe so, yeah.
Did I skip one?
We went through it.
about the misconduct, inappropriate misconduct with people and by staff members?
Yes. We did mention that one briefly.
Okay, I'm like, 'cause I maybe misunderstood, I knew that one before about the library and, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I don't think anyone had any discussion at the moment on it, but
Okay, it's just window-
it did get mentioned
Okay.
briefly. Sure, no problem. So, go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple of questions just generally about this. This is the first time I've
Sure, yeah.
really taken a look at resolutions that come from WASB. Perhaps you can help me, Dr. Siebert, with. Number one, how do these resolutions come to the assembly? Is it somebody within WASB who drafts them? Do they come from member schools? Combination of both? What is the originating source of the resolutions we have here?
They come from member school boards.
Okay.
And so they go to the Policy and Resolutions Committee of the WASB, who then selects which ones move through. Not all of them move through. These 11,
you
they've
know-
selected to move through.
Do you know what criteria they use to decide which ones move through and which ones don't?
I don't.
Okay. Okay, so a general comment, and then I'll just kind of offer what I think might be the best approach here. Sure. One of the things that I find challenging about reviewing these and trying to determine how I feel about them and how I would want our district's delegate to vote on them is, in many cases, they're very thin on details. Whether that's cost, whether that's the implementation mechanisms. And I think we all know, especially being on the policy committee, the devil is always in the details. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little nervous about weighing in one way or the other without knowing what it is they're actually going to be lobbying for. These sort of set, in my opinion, maybe everyone reads them a little bit differently, they set sort of these general statements, but we don't know what legislation might be out there that WASB may say, well, we've been chartered with supporting this legislation because we have a resolution, but from a school district perspective, had we known that that's ultimately what we were signing up for if we voted for it, we may not have. So I don't know, I guess I would say I'm comfortable just if people have questions about any of the specific policies. My concern is if we go through them one by one here, we could spend all night pondering or pontificating about what potential questions or concerns we may have or things we want to support as a district. and find out that that has nothing to do with what they ultimately lobby for when a certain piece of legislation gets drafted, because it's so vague.
And just to add to that a little bit, when I first came on the board, my first year I was the WASB delegate. So at the time, I got to, I guess, virtually attend this this day because they made that an option at the time, post-COVID. But so I got to listen to the process and how the votes went. And you know, my first sense of it was, you know, the votes were pretty much overwhelming in every way. And what I mean by that, it was, you know, 70-30 or 90-10, you know, approval. And there were only a couple, when I recall, I think there was maybe 14 or 15 that first year that were not approved. And people had a chance to come up and talk about them. And I think my overall sense of it was, you know, the school districts that are part of WASB are funneling these ideas to it. It gets written up as a resolution, and of course, there's already overwhelming support behind it because, you know, many of the districts are having those same conversations and they're bringing those same ideas in. So to your point, you know, it was, it's kind of hard to kind of go through, and it's actually much harder to try to dig into what specifically these policies are getting at. As you say, in legislation, you know, are there counterpoints to this? You know, there's some things that are provided within WASB. If you follow it closely, there's tidbits there, but you know, for the most part, as Dr. Siebert said, you know, all this is being pushed forward so that it can be brought forward as legislation, hopefully someday. So, I don't know if Mr. Moore has anything to add. I know you were the rep last year, and so I don't know if your experience was any different, maybe much richer than mine, because I got to watch it on my computer and participate that way, but I don't know if you recall going or not, or.
No, I mean, everything you described.
Microphone.
I believe everything you described similarly, from even virtual, same in person, so, even with CISA, so, I mean, yeah. I thought it was, it was a good way for me to learn about how the legislative process works with school boards, I guess, and how things do originate, like Mr. Watt brought up. So it was more of a learning experience in terms of, it's a lot of pieces behind the scene on how things come to be, and how different policies get chosen. So it was more of that experience and engaging with other members of different school districts. So yeah. I will say that I do agree with Mr. Watt in terms of some things are very vague, that you don't know, and it's not very in detail. So it will be up to that WASB representative or delegate to get more information and bring it back to the board, I guess, when they go to these different meetings, because again, what we see as a general board is the little pieces, the small pieces, but the delegate has the opportunity to go to those meetings and get more information and bring it back to the board, and then let the board discuss on which ones they want to go forward with. So does that make sense what I'm saying, or?
So it was my impression that these are what are going to be voted on in January, correct? So there's not going to be an opportunity for Mr. Zenobia, for example, to go and learn about the resolutions and then bring them back here and explain to us so we can choose whether we sign on for them or not, right?
Right, but I'm saying like beforehand, so like sometimes the WASB have meetings, so that delegates go to, like CISA, like you can go to these meetings for that specific elected person.
Right, but we aren't going to have any other policy
No.
meetings or.
No,
board meetings
you're right about
before
that.
then, so.
Yeah. No, and I'm sorry, but to that point, I think, if the WASB represents the board, of course. if anyone, I mean, this is outside of tonight, if anyone had a question or wanted to comment on any of these, please reach out to me and say, hey, this, I just wanted to give you this feedback, or my feelings on that probably would be taken into account and given a different perspective than, to make the whole board sit and go through all these again. How valuable is that to the overall use of our time? I think for here tonight, perhaps maybe the best way to do this would be, if any of us want to talk about something specific in here, maybe we can go around and take one, and then however many we get through, if Dr. Siebert wants to maybe add some more context to a few that he feels are important, maybe we could get through a few of these and have a little bit of discussion on them. Probably is the best way. I don't know that it would maybe be necessary to go through each and every one, but let's start with that and see what kind of discussion we get. So if I see a hand, and I do, Mrs. White, please begin.
I see a lot of these, it's like cleaning up the language, like taking a whole section and redoing that whole section with different things. But the two that I found especially of interest are the very first two on the front page. The idea of actually paying student teachers for their semester, or in my case, 2 semesters of work, when you have a dual major, that you're working as a teacher in the classroom without any compensation and paying for the credit to be able to be there. It's a really tough kind of situation. And this is like decades ago that I experienced it. And I really think that, to have a student teacher, like an intern, be paid for their experience. Maybe less as a student teacher because there's more training going on than an intern where you're assuming more responsibility. But I think that's a great idea. And especially when it's harder and harder to get teachers to come into the profession. I think that concept is a really valuable one, that it's time. There are very few other interns that would go out from college, and work for a semester, like in IT or accounting, and not get paid for their internship.
So, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Dan.
Well, I was going to piggyback off that real quick. Minnesota does do that. Minnesota does a great job with that. So I'm happy to see that too, being talked about what Ms. Voice said, because it is a full-time job. Your senior year, you're asking college students education majors have to give up a whole semester to go student teach at a school district for a whole year. Some of them have to go 12 weeks, some of them have to go 16 weeks, depending on their licensure and stuff. So they're in the classroom. They're not on the college campus unless they have the seminars or anything like that. They're not enjoying their last senior year, being implemented into the college life experience is what I'm saying. They're not even on campus that much because they're doing their full-time student teaching practicum, which is again a full-time job, and it's unpaid. So most internships you do get paid for. So I'm happy to see that. And student teachers sometimes have to still supply their own supplies because they have to bring things for them for the students, but also they have to go also not just working with the cooperating teacher. Some, depending on the licensure, some student teachers have to go 2 or 3 weeks where they pick up on their own, right, they're supposed to, and teach the class on their own with the cooperating teacher by their side, but they're assuming the full responsibility, if that makes sense. So just wanted to put that out there.
Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so I guess I read a resolution like this and the one below it, and I think, yeah, in theory, these seem like spectacular ideas. Who's paying for it? That's where I is this something, would this become a cost that the school districts would have to pick up? Is there some sort of funding that they're going to commit to in the legislation coming from the state somewhere? Does it eventually become an unfunded mandate? They fund it initially, and then pretty soon the cost of doing that increases and they stop funding it, or the funding doesn't keep up with the demand. So this goes to what I was kind of talking about when we first started. Like, in theory, sure, I think if there was a way we could find a way to, to pay the student teachers or stipends for cooperating teachers, as it talks about in the next one, in theory, sure, but I don't want us to wind up with WASB advocating for a piece of legislation that would suddenly add a significant portion of, or a significant expense item on our budget necessarily. So in some ways, this is why I don't know how you can say we should or shouldn't support it without knowing some of those details.
Yeah, Mr. Moore.
You make great points, and I think it is, I do agree with you that, in theory, it sounds great, and, you don't know how we're gonna pay for it and things like that. I think it's tricky, because in this situation, you're asking for student teachers to get stipends and cooperating teachers. Well, in order to get licensed, you have to have a cooperating teacher, and that cooperating teacher have to agree with taking on that responsibility of working with that student teacher. They don't have to do it. They're not required to. When cooperating teachers take on a student teacher, they're being very generous and saying, yes, I will take this student teacher under my wing, but they don't have to. So I guess, when they do, they're assuming the responsibility of not only managing their own students, 30 kids a day, but now they have to manage a student teacher and show them the ropes and mentor them. So it is similar, it is sort of like a second job. I guess I'm just thinking of ways to not put burdens on the taxpayers, I guess, how to incentivize more cooperating teachers to assume the role of supporting student teachers, if that makes sense, because they don't have to, they're not required to. When they choose to, it's an act of grace and honor, but I don't want it to get to a situation where teachers feel burnt out and they, listen, I've seen it happen where I don't want to mentor a student teacher this semester. I'm burnt out. I've mentored 2 or 3 in the last years. I need a break, or because that student teachers have to go. They need a cooperating teacher to get that license. They have to be supervised by a master teacher. So, and a lot of them are retiring too. So that puts a burden. That's another situation to talk about for a later date. But I do agree with you, Mr. Watt, on that. And it's a complicated situation and a tough one. So,
Well, and maybe just to help with this a little bit, so to both Mr. Moore's and Mrs. Voigt's part, most people, including myself, you student teach with no compensation, but there is a path already exists, which is this WIP, the Wisconsin Improvement Program that they mentioned. That's already in place. That's a DPI program where they have you can apply to be a teaching intern, and that's when you do get paid, but that cost comes from the district. So, for example, next semester, we will have 2 interns that we will have in the district, and the cost is roughly $5,000 a person. So if you would extrapolate that to all the student teachers that would come into a school district, that would become, certainly unless there was a state funding source for it, a significant challenge for any school district.
How many in our district would you say? Do you have a rough idea of how many student teachers we have right now?
No, not as an
Yeah.
overall
Okay.
number.
no.
But, I mean, it's, boy, I mean, I can get it. I will get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that might just be an offline conversation we can have, just so I understand it. But this kind of gets to the point though, right? Like, let's say it's 100, just for the sake of the discussion. Now we're talking about a $500,000 line item. That suddenly shows up on our budget that we've got to figure out how to fit in amongst all our other priorities. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, even though I probably already have by this point. My point, though, again, is there's just not enough information here for me to be able to weigh in on whether I think supporting this is a good idea or not, because it'll come down to the details and the individual bills or legislation that may address this, and how those are or not how they are or are not funded and the impact they have on districts. And I don't see any guidance in the resolution that would help the WASB lobbyist decide how to decide which way to go, or how to lobby on a bill that may address that, but leaves a big bill on a school district's desk.
Mr. Moore.
Now, I do think 5,000 is a lot. That's a lot. What I had in mind was maybe, 1,200, a stipend, like, it's a semester, so they're still in college, so a stipend, but 5,000 is, to me, that's a big,
Mr. Moore, your mic went off.
I'll just say that.
Sure.
Can I just get big picture clarification here, and I apologize if I'm the only one who's unclear on this. WASB right now is just communicating these resolutions to us, saying that this is what they want them to be.
Yes.
Are we supposed to vote as a board next month on whether we're supporting these or not?
No, that's.
No, ultimately-
WASB's reps job.
Yep.
Okay.
You're authorizing Mr. Zenobia to vote on your behalf.
Okay.
Right, so,
So,
Yeah.
my question is, whether we support them or not, if they, by vote, whatever, a majority of the reps support it, then we're kind of on board whether we support it or not. Is that correct?
They're
gonna move forward with these
going to pass,
resolutions, and then
right.
hopefully-
They're going to pass or fail all of these, and my sense is that an overwhelming number of them will pass, you know, by a wide margin. And, not to get in the way here, I think in the past there have been instances where things have been lobbied into Congress and, there's no funding for it or not enough funding. And, the special education is probably the one that everybody talks about the most since I've been in education, or on the board rather, where, I correct my numbers, I believe it was some amount of 60% or something that's being done, about half of that, correct? So that's a law that's been passed. I don't know if WASB was instrumental at all.
Federal law.
Yeah, it's federal law, but I mean, as far as the legislation that went into it of similar type people that would have supported that. I know just a couple years ago, WASB's, one of the resolutions was to try to, lobby Congress for an uptick in that funding, because it's not there. And I think most people would agree that, hey, if we could get more funding for, this area, we will take it. Everybody would take it, right? But it's just, to your point, Mr. Watt, it's just that the funding is not there. And so even though they go to lobby for it and get that number to try to come up, again, like you're saying, there's limited resources that we have to work with, and where should we put them, right? And so, I appreciate where you're coming from. It's tough to come down the side of any of these when, again, you don't know the full extent, but you want to make a good decision anyway. Go ahead, Mr. Watt.
yeah. So I just come back to your question, Mr. Brusky. I guess, here's the thing, right? Mr. Zenobia is gonna go to that delegate assembly. We as a board have talked quite a bit, over the last, 4 or 6 months about our relationship with WASB and whether or not we continue. One of our concerns, at least one of mine, is what are they spending our dues on when they're lobbying? Well, we've talked about we need to make sure our voice is heard. And I guess what I'm getting at is I'm having a really difficult time trying to figure out how this committee, or even I personally, or the board, should advise Mr. Zenobia on representing the interests of our district as a delegate. Yeah, maybe they'll get passed, but at least we'll have a vote on the record, and that will help tell us whether or not, they are representing our viewpoints or not. But I don't even know how we would provide guidance to Mr. Zenobia on these, because it's all ultimately gonna come down to the details of the legislation. I wonder sometimes whether these resolutions even make sense, because we're talking about legislation in the abstract, right? As opposed to, maybe we should be just helping WASB make decisions about that when there are actual bills that are in committee, right, or in draft, that we know are gonna wind up in committee, rather than taking these broader resolutions and saying, we support these things, and then finding out that WASB's interpretation of what a good bill on that is very different than what we as a board, or the majority of the board, would feel is a good version of that bill for this district.
Okay, so we did have some discussion on 1 and 2. I don't know if there's any others that we would like to talk about, discuss? How many of the members would want to raise any particular ones? Yes, Mrs. Voigt.
Like I said, a lot of it is, we talked to Special Ed Bill a few minutes ago. When you get to Resolution 24, number 4, it's basically updating the language. The idea of least restrictive environment, which was the original language, is now an education environment to the greatest extent possible. So it's some of it is really semantic. It's just coming up with a better way of, like a more appropriate way of saying some of the things that they said, decades ago in new context. Mainstreaming was all the rage. Now, that's not a good word. It's using inclusive practices. So like some of these, I think, are just semantics. That I don't think there's anything controversial about them. It's just trying to have, like, what we keep talking about is having current language in the resolutions meet current practice. If you're not going to use the term least restrictive environment or mainstreaming, in everyday practice, then you shouldn't have it in your resolution, is how I see some of these. So I don't think it's a big deal at all. And like just the wording about how to call, someone who's visually handicapped or hearing impaired, like no colorblind, like what's the current terminology for the different conditions.
I don't want to jump too far ahead there, but one of the resolutions I found interesting was 2408, which was on artificial intelligence. And maybe my question here is, how do school districts keep their students honest in using AI currently? I just think it's, resolution aside, an interesting dilemma I think we're already in and maybe we don't fully appreciate. Dr. Siebert, maybe give us some color on how that's going.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd say it's more of a secondary challenge that we face. And teachers talk with kids about its capabilities, like a ChatGPT, for example. I think the other thing is that our teachers know our kids awfully well. They know their patterns, they know their abilities, and when they see something that doesn't quite look like that maybe looks a lot different, they have those conversations. So I don't, to my understanding, we have not had significant challenges with it, just because I think we've been somewhat proactive in talking with kids about it, and teachers have been really on their toes in terms of if they see something that doesn't quite look like this typical standard of work, they're talking about it.
Mrs. Voigt.
Again, this is a concept without any real explanation of where they're going to go. They're just saying that we should be part of the discussion, because this is a brand new open area that who knows where we're going to go. And they're just saying that WASB wants to be at the table when they talk about it. And I think that that's valid.
Certainly will be a big issue for a long time. Mr. Watt.
Mr. Sombia, maybe, I don't know if this will help our discussion or not, more broadly around all these resolutions. You're going to be the delegate, right? What are you looking for from this committee or this board to help guide you in your mission to represent us when you do go to the assembly?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. I think just some discussion around these generally. The AI one is pretty basic, Any feedback, and I don't think that needs to be here tonight. Again, if anybody on the committee or any board member wants to give me specific feedback, I will be more than happy to take it. So there are a couple interesting things throughout this. Dr. Siebert, could you just walk us through generally, I guess 3 and 4 kind of go together a little bit too. There's some language things being talked about in each one. And if there is any, questions or comments as we go, knowing what we've covered already, please chime in, but if you could.
I can go very high level on these if you'd like. So
Sure.
like 3 facility barriers for special ed kids, that's talking about things like lack of elevators, lack of ramps, non-handicap accessible restroom facilities, things like that, that we do a really good job with and are constantly updating and doing everything that we can. Special ed general policy, that was one that Mrs. Voigt talked about. It's just different word choices. Education has a lot of jargon, and educational jargon also changes over time. So special ed particularly, what kids are diagnosed with has changed in my career, which is not nearly as long as Mrs. Voigt's, and she's seen it too. So that's just updating words. State specialty schools, there's one of those. It's in Janesville. It's the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So that's what that bill is talking about. We consult with them. They're basically like a resource for other school districts when you have kids that are blind or visually impaired. And we have consulted with them to get assistance. That's what that one's talking about. Seclusion and restraint, that's a popular topic that comes up multiple times. That's when you have to protect a student from themselves or others by using, in our case, the nonviolent crisis intervention techniques that we've talked about in student services. So that's what that one's talking about. Number 7, the Office of School Safety. This is asking for that to be refunded again. They found funding to go through the rest of this calendar year, and the primarily thing that we use with that is the Speak Up, Speak Out feature, which is where kids can send a message when something is going wrong or something that they're concerned about. It goes to a hub in Madison. That hub in Madison then tells us, sends me or Deputy Superintendent Getterman an email, or Mr. Leonard, or the Director of Student Services, that we then push to the principals and they investigate and look into it. The other thing that we've...
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mrs. Voigt.
That's one that I had talked about at the beginning, one of our first meetings here. That was one of the things that I asked, do we use Speak Up, Speak Out? Because this was not being considered in the budget. And then after that, they found money by the Department of Justice to keep it going for a year.
Yep.
Yeah, because the feeling from education across the state was that this is a valuable program. It was originally funded by the federal government. And then, okay, now they want the state to pick it up and keep going with it. And the state said no. And the DOJ said, well, wait a minute, let's do it for one more year. This resolution saying this is valuable, it should be state funded. You know, if we could have our request, we would like to have it be state funded and have that continue. And I think that's what I see this resolution saying.
That's exactly correct, Mrs. Boyd. And so just so the board knows too, I mean, we have done the incident mapping that they talk about in here. We do that in collaboration with the police department. So they have those maps of what our schools look like. You see those numbers on the outside of the windows, that's part of that. So like if they roll up, they have access to the building, they know where to go.
Would we have done that regardless of whether or not there was a Office of School Safety?
We have a very good partnership with the police department, and that's something that they wanted to do, so I think, yes, we would have. And then certainly Verkada, that Mr. Schloman talked about tonight, that the board approved, that new camera system and all-inclusive safety and security system is significant for us, along with all the drills and practice that we do. So, you know, this is to Mr. Wad's earlier point, certainly it's a valuable tool. I'm not sure why it wasn't funded, or not sure if it was funded, what else might not be funded, right? There's finite resources. So, but that's just an overview of what that is. We talked about artificial intelligence.
I'm sorry, can we back up
Oh, yeah,
to this Office of School Safety?
sure.
So this is one of the things that I tend to have a big problem with, just generally, around things like, so the Office of School Safety funding, as I understand it, came out of one of the COVID bills, and it was funded only for a couple of years, right? No one in the state asked for it before. There was not a clamoring for a Office of School Safety that I'm aware of prior to COVID. A pile of money landed in our lap, and now we have a number of people who want to claim that the sky is going to fall in if now the state of Wisconsin doesn't fill that gap with $100 million of its own instead of getting the funding from the federal government. And this is the kind of stuff that, so this is why I asked, the stuff that it calls for in here, So I understand that the Speak Up, Speak Out appears to be an effective tool that many districts have used. What percentage of 100 million goes to supporting that program across the state? I don't know. My guess is it's a fraction. I'm guessing what a lot of this money is bureaucratic overhead. Are the programs that they talk about valuable? Maybe, but the fact of the matter is, we're doing them already. Why do we need, let the school districts decide whether these are initiatives that they want to take. Let them find the money in their budgets to do it, as we would have done, based on what you're telling me, say, around the incident mapping. And go back to where we were pre-COVID, when everyone seemed to be getting along just fine. Certainly, school safety issues are always a priority in school districts. But I don't know why we need to go to Madison and have WASB tell the state that they need to come up with $100 million that we were never spending before, that we were only spending for 2 years because the federal government was dumping it in our lap. And now that that funding source is dried up, somehow the taxpayers of Wisconsin need to find the money for this. I would say each school district, if they feel that these are important initiatives, need to prioritize that within their spending. And I see no reason for us to be supporting a resolution that funds the Office of School Safety at the cost of $100 million a year to the taxpayers of the state, when we never did it before, and the only reason we're doing it today is because the feds hooked us on the money, and now that they've yanked it, people feel like they need to protect all the jobs that were created as a result of it.
All right.
All right. So.
Go ahead, Dr. Seaver.
No problem. The next one is classroom technology. That is changing a bunch of, repealing some stuff and then putting in some new ideas around virtual charter schools, CISA and virtual charter schools, more choices for families essentially. 2410, that one has a lot of financial pieces in it. Looking at opposing school district revenue limits. You've probably heard Darren or I give this lecture. So if you go back to 1993, there was a three-legged stool. The QEO, which was the qualified economic offer, you couldn't give more than 3.8% in pay and benefit increase. The state provided 2/3 funding at that time to school districts, and then they put in revenue limits so that school districts, because of that funding, couldn't overtly tax their communities. Over time, the first two legs of the stool, the QEO and the 2/3 funding, fell apart. The revenue limits have stayed in place. If you remember too, we advocated for and were successful in the low revenue limit relief this year. So getting our spending from $10,200 a kid to up to $11,000, which is significant for a low spending school district like us that had been since 1993. So talks about those kind of pieces, talks about matching the revenue limit to CPI. We probably shouldn't forget we have the $325 a year. Now that'll be added on top of the 11,000. That won't certainly be CPI, but it is something that's currently in the budget. It talks about carrying over unused revenue authority. So the way that works is if a board doesn't levy up to their total capacity in 1 year, the next year you can go back and reclaim that for 1 year. Otherwise, you forfeit that revenue limit authority going forward. There's a part in there that talks about moving to, currently our budgets are based on a 3-year rolling average of attendance. And you see Darren always has those 3 years. This would say you could use a 5 or a 3, whichever was more beneficial to you. So that's a difference. It looks at funding summer school at 100%. Right now we get about 40% on our summer school reimbursement. So you use a formula, how many kids you have versus how many days times how many minutes. You put that in a formula, it spits out a number of FTE, which is about 40% of what you get for a current kid, and you get that money 1 year later. They're saying they'd like it to go to 100%, and you'd get it in the year that you did the summer school. Providing a district's revenue limit be determined prior to the start of the district's fiscal year. Now, wouldn't that make sense, right? Like before we started spending the money, we would know what our revenue limit was. And we would also, if it matched, with our state aid, that would be ideal. And you could approve a budget before July 1, as now you approve it at the end of October. So that's an interesting concept. The sliding scale, we don't fully understand what that means. Darren and I had tried to look into that quite a bit. It appears to be designed to somehow increase your membership, which is your student count, which ultimately then has a correlating effect of increasing your funding. But we can't exactly put our finger on what that is, so we'll do some more work with that. And then the last one is licensure, which are some of the things we've talked about earlier in terms of flexibility for teacher shortages, alternative license pathways, addressing the technical education or what we maybe remember as the shop teacher, right? The shortages that we have there, they're very difficult to find. School social worker licensure is in there. And then there's a number of other pieces. There's a lot of talk about teacher competency exams. You probably have heard of the FORT exam, the Foundations of Reading. That one is someone that sometimes gets some debate on. People can't pass it, so should we keep giving it if we need more teachers? There's that kind of concept. They talk about teacher competency in here in the exam. But I think if I could just in a summary say, when Mr. Zenobia goes to this, he has a very strong understanding of the board and of the committee and of the school district of Waukesha. And then secondly, sometimes when you're there, some of the debate is insightful, right? So you might go in thinking, I really like this, and then you hear some of the debate, and he might think maybe that's not a great idea, or vice versa, right? We flip it. So I think like he said earlier, if you have feedback that you think about, feel free to let him know. Otherwise, I think we can feel very good with him going down there and representing the district and the board. Over there, I should say, not down, just over. We're very close to Milwaukee.
Depends which way you go, I guess.
Yes, yes.
Any other questions or comments on any of that? Okay. Well, then we would be looking for any future recommendations in our other business. Mrs. Boyd?
I had thought last time that it'd be a really good thing to do a resolution about the number of fire drills that are required. In the big picture now, that since fire drills were first required, that's before all the lockdown, kinds of drills that are necessary, and, the school shooter type of, drills to be able to deal with that situation, that I'd like to see the state legislature look at how many minutes are we going to be demanding of instructional time for drilling, especially something like a fire drill. You would just walk outside in the same place every month. It really, I think once each semester, twice a year would be adequate, especially with all these other drills that you're trying to keep track of what the procedures are for those safety drills. But again, I had thought that it might be something that could be a WASB resolution, but I went into their book of 78 pages and all the resolutions over the years, and they don't have anything much related to the state legislative safety rules at all. So this would be a whole new category. So I'm not sure if it'd be something that we'd go right to Scott Allen and say, hey, is this something that you could see writing a bill to address? Or, which might be the more effective way than trying to convince WASB to do it, and then they're it's not gonna happen very quickly. It's kind of a slow moving kind of process to have.
Dr. Sieber, would that, to your point of talking either to WASB or the state legislature at some point, I know we discussed this at length in our Student Services Committee, and I don't know if that would be something to address here in the future or through, Student Services, so we could take it up here if not, but.
Yeah, we
maybe
can certainly
we'll
talk about
decide
that, where to put it, sure.
Any other futures? Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so and you may already be planning on doing this, but I think it might be beneficial to come back and talk about how each of those resolutions, what the votes were they passed, was there anything that you learned or that was insightful to you in the debate? I'd like to hear some more on that. I don't know if you want to do that in committee or you just want to provide some sort of a report. I don't. But I do think that would be beneficial to know your perspective on on the debates and the final resolutions of those, or the final vote on those resolutions.
Yeah, I think we did do a recap, at least in policy, I think, of what happened at the convention.
When we had government relations a few
Okay.
moons back, we would do it after, so there's no reason we couldn't do it during the government relations part here. Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
I think that'd be a really good idea, because my first term on the board, we just had a rep go to do these things. I never even saw a resolution in the 3 years I was on the board. You know, we had a person designated to go, they went, they represented us, you know. I have no idea what the resolutions were or how that person chose to represent us. So I appreciate the open dialogue and just what are they thinking about? And I found it fascinating to look at the 78 pages of resolutions. Because they reference the resolution book, it's like, okay, so I went online and found it. And, you know, like I said, there's nothing in there about things like safety drills. So maybe a new thing that they could take up, but, you know.
All right. Any other future business? No, seeing none, that will adjourn our meeting for this evening. Our next meeting is February 12th, here in the boardroom, possibly 6:15. We'll see. Thank you.